I'm Matt.
And I'm Brandon. Welcome to the couch, where we share our thoughts, talk about all things nerdy, not just for our own pleasure.
But for all fankind.
So today, we're going to talk about seeing old movies in the theater again, or even for the first time if you were not around when the movie originally came out. So some of the movies we've seen recently are Return of the Jedi, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and even Jurassic Park. But what's some of your favorite things about seeing these movies that we grew up with, like on TV, now finally in like a theater?
So I think the coolest part of it is it's a different experience when you see a movie on the big screen in a theater. And a lot of these movies came out well before our time, before we were born. And I think the opportunity for us to see these movies that we love that we had only watched on television or on a smaller screen, to have the opportunity to see it on a big screen, um, it adds an element that I feel like we've always wished we could see
Mm-hmm.
and have, but hadn't until they're brought back to the theaters. And I think it adds an element and an excitement of it's almost like seeing the movie for the first time again. It
It
really
is.
is.
It really is. I mean, thinking back on it, some of these movies, like the first experiences I had with them, were on VHS.
Right.
And that's like with the like bad video quality and like the small square screen TVs. Nowadays we can watch them on like streaming or on Blu-ray, whatever quality we want. But going into the theater and actually seeing it the way it was meant to be seen is just, it's a new experience.
You get the sound, you get the screen, you get the movie theater, you get all of it, and it, as you said, it's the way they're meant to be seen.
Yeah, and even like on top of just like all the things that make the movie what it is, the thing you don't really think about is seeing these movies with an audience. Because sometimes, like, you're so used to the way you react to these things
Right.
that you don't really know how others react unless it's like your friends and you saw them react on the couch with you. But we recently saw Jurassic Park, and one of the things that surprised me was the whole theater was children, like little kids. And I kind of grew up thinking of Jurassic Park as maybe not a horror movie, but a scary movie.
Scary elements to the movie.
Yeah, like it wasn't the movie I kind of would have thought you'd show your kids, but
Right.
nowadays it's because the dinosaurs are cool, and I think we've become a little desensitized to that kind of like dinosaur violence, I guess. I was just shocked. It was all kids and they were loving it. Like, it's not the greatest experience as an adult, like hearing a bunch of kids talking through a movie the whole time, but
Right.
that was kind of something I didn't think about. It's a new element to seeing the movie. You see others enjoy it, and I think there's a bit of enjoyment in that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. There was something about the scene from the movie when it's raining and the T-Rex walks through the fence, and you see and hear it roar in the theater, to hear the reactions, to see and hear the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It felt like you were seeing it for the first time.
Yeah.
It added an entire new element to seeing that movie, and all the movies that we've seen, that you don't get watching it on a small screen.
Was the first thing we saw Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yeah,
Because we've seen a few now.
I want to say it was Return of the Jedi. I think Star Wars.
I think you're right.
I think Star Wars. Return
So
of
the
Jedi
first
was
thing we
first.
saw was Return of the Jedi, when Disney did the 40-year anniversary, and like I got to be honest, Return of the Jedi was never one of my top favorites of Star Wars, but I do love it. And so seeing it in theaters, I was kind of thinking like, okay, this will just be a new way to see it. And walking out of the theater, I found myself loving that movie in a way that I hadn't ever even considered before. Like it felt more alive, if that makes any sense. Um, I just, I don't know. It felt like it leapt off the screen at me rather than sitting on my couch or laying in bed watching it.
No, it completely does. There's just there's an entire aspect that seeing these movies that came well before our time, that I like the way you said it jumps off the screen. It feels more alive. It adds an entire new element to seeing a movie that we've both seen several times that you just don't get no matter how many times you see it on a smaller screen.
Yeah, it's all those things, everything that makes a movie. And I kind of remember, this was a while back. This was before we started seeing these recent ones, but
Right.
I had the chance to see a Space Odyssey in IMAX. And I remember the first time I'd ever seen that movie was just at home, probably in bed, I think. And I was pretty young, but I just didn't find it as engaging. I wasn't as interested in it. It felt very slow at home and just watching it on my own. And I found myself easily distracted. But seeing that movie specifically in IMAX blew me away. The visuals were just unlike anything I had imagined possible from that movie. Like, I'd seen it before and I just kind of thought, this is kind of okay. But seeing it in theaters, I walked away like, whoa, those images were just beautiful. Like, the design of everything, it just, you can't see that kind of detail at home.
Right.
And I would love to see more movies coming out in theaters for a generation that maybe didn't get the opportunity to see it.
And I will say too, the more of these older movies that we see in theaters, the more I'm excited to see more of them, because I find that I find that that the in today's society, especially young people, everything's streaming. Everything, you have almost access to everything at home, and to have the opportunity to see for people our age that are now living in this era of streaming, that you can go see these movies that we wouldn't have had a chance to see on a big screen in a time when everything is readily available on streaming.
Yeah, so that brings me to a question for you. Do you watch things on your phone? And do you feel like you're missing anything when you do? Or like, how does that work? Because I know my sister like watches things on her phone all the time, and I'm always like, you got to watch on the biggest screen possible. But to her, it's just, that's normal. She likes watching on her phone.
Right. I have before, very infrequently. I don't do it often because I find that it's too hard to focus. To get right down to it, it's harsh on your eyes to try and watch something on a screen that's that small. So I have from time to time, but not frequently.
It's like when you're playing catch up and you got to watch something quickly.
Yeah, it's you don't get it when you watch something on a screen that small. You're watching it basically just to watch it. Yeah. Because you can't focus on anything. You can't focus on the detail. The sound quality from your phone's not going to be good.
Do you watch them with headphones or like just through the speakers on the phone?
More often in headphones, because if I happen to be, typically I'm not in a location where I can watch without headphones. But I do it so infrequently that I would just rather at that point watch when I get home. Yeah. Or on a real screen.
I mean, watching these things in theaters versus watching them on a phone, obviously there's a difference. Yeah. But it's the things that it's like when you watch it on a TV versus a theater that you don't realize.
I feel like it's stuff I don't know if take for granted is the right word, but it's just, you get, when you go to a theater to see a movie, any movie, it's all the whole entire thing is an experience. You're in a large theater with an audience, seeing something on a big screen with a very good and strong surround sound system, and you just don't get that.
Yeah, nowadays you can kind of get some of these speaker systems. I know you can get Atmos at home, but it's like these aren't cheap things to install. So it's for the people who really want the best experience. But most of the time, most like general viewers, they're not going to have that. Like, the best experience you can possibly get for everybody is in a theater.
It is. And again, I feel like because of the whole streaming dynamic that's in society today, people don't go to the theater anymore. I feel like it's a lost thing that people have stopped, and I think COVID had something to do with this as well, but I think people have really stopped going to the theater. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with streaming too, just because I like collecting movie posters and that sort of thing, with all the streaming stuff, I find it harder to get your favorite movie's posters if your favorite movie was a streaming movie.
Yeah.
There are some, so they sometimes do release them, but I like those like classic, like 27 by 40-inch posters, like double-sided.
The ones that you see on the theater walls and outside of
in the
theater.
light boxes.
Right.
But you don't get that with the streaming either.
No.
Not very often.
The seeing something in a theater adds the magic, I believe, that cinema is built on.
Yeah.
It's great when you can watch things at home. It's cool that you have it, you have it accessible to you. But nothing beats seeing a movie in a theater.
No.
It really doesn't.
No. I mean, it's almost like if you knew an older movie that you love was going to replay and you had kids or something, like, I would want to wait to show them the movie in theaters.
Yeah.
Just because I want, whether it's your kids or your friends or anyone, maybe someone who hasn't seen it that you know that's your age, I would just want them to see it the best way possible.
Right.
And that's in a theater.
And if it's like, if we are seeing these movies for the however many times we've seen them, and it feels like we're seeing it for the first time in a theater, imagine what it would feel like for someone to actually see it for the first time on a theater. Piggybacking off of what you said, that you'd love it to be someone's first time seeing it on the theater or in the theater.
I mean, I just remember when Marvel started coming out with their movies, like, and then people started to get into it, the idea of this connected universe and all these like things going on. There came a point where it went from just going to a regular movie to having an experience.
Yeah.
And I remember that shift. And it was around when the first Avengers came out that audiences started like reacting. It wasn't just go sit there, be quiet and watch a movie. It was go and experience a movie.
It is. It's part of I think it's part of what makes any type of event special, whether it be going to see a movie, whether it be going to a show, whether it be going to a concert, whether it be going to a sporting event, seeing anything with an audience, reacting with other people that are there for the same reason you are.
Yeah.
It's
shared bond that you get even without acknowledging each other.
No. Yeah. It's there. Everyone's there for the same reason, because you enjoy whatever you happen to be going to see or watch. And I don't think it's something that should ever go away. And I think that's why we get so excited anytime one of these new movies comes out. It's
funny too, because when people did start like treating movie theaters more like experiences, my first reaction wasn't positive right away. Right. It was more like, oh, these people are kind of being loud and disruptive during the movie. But it wasn't until I actually think it might have been Avengers. It might have been a little later into it. So maybe one of the other Avengers or something. But I remember I think it was a Marvel movie, and it was kind of the first time audiences were really not getting rowdy, but they were like almost being involved in it. Like, it was audibly noticeable. And my first reaction was kind of like, oh, people are a little too loud. But then having like gone back to the theater multiple times to see the movie, each time there'd be less and less because people have already seen the movie. So now less people are going to see it. And I found myself a little disappointed that there weren't people reacting anymore. There was just something about the way a scene hit when you heard everyone else react to it.
Yeah. And I find that even though all these the older movies that we've been seeing, the reactions they all feel genuine.
Yeah.
The stuff that we've all seen, Jurassic Park has been around for 20 years. The reactions to the big scene in that movie are still genuine to this day. Us included, everyone in that theater had probably seen that movie several times. And the reactions to everything are genuine and real.
I know my sister was with us when we saw it. And I think for her, I don't know if it had been a little while since she'd seen it, but one of the things she said was that she felt like there was a lot of extra stuff in the movie.
Yeah.
And I think it was just seeing it on a big screen. It just feels like more. Cause I kept telling her, I think that's the same movie you've always seen there. I don't think there's any extra scenes.
And I find too, you know that saying where when you see something multiple times, you pick up on things that you didn't notice in previous times. I find that was even enhanced seeing it in the theater.
Yeah.
Because you get the extra sound, you get the bigger screen. It's just...
What was a moment from Jurassic Park that like stood out to you when you saw it in
seeing it on the big screen?
Yeah. Versus like seeing it at home.
So aside from the famous scene with the T-Rex where it pops out from the fence and it roars, obviously that scene is famous for a reason. Also the scene where they're in the Jeep driving away from the T-Rex and you see the close up in the rearview mirror. That scene was another one. And then for me, the kitchen scene with the two velociraptors.
Okay, yeah.
It felt very, I don't know, there was something about it that was very
you kind of feel, because you're in a dark room trapped with this screen, you feel trapped with them.
It felt eerie almost. That it was dark. You felt like you were in the kitchen with because at home
you can turn on the lights and look around. Okay, I'm not in this room with these dinosaurs, but in a theater, it's like you're trapped with it. Like,
yeah.
Again,
it's the experience part. It's an experience. When you watch something at home, you're watching. You're just watching it. In the theater, you don't get that. In the theater, you get that experience that you don't get watching something at home.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything from Raiders that stood out to me, because I think that's the one I've enjoyed the most so far. There's just something about Indiana Jones going on an adventure that I didn't think needed to be seen that way on a screen.
Yeah.
Because I love the Indiana Jones movies, but like I never felt like I was missing out on anything. And then I saw it in theaters and it just felt like it's probably goes back to that idea with the Raptors being trapped in the theater and trapped with the Raptors. Like I'm on this adventure with them. I'm not just sitting in my living room watching this. Like I'm experiencing it. The way that the lightning strikes when everyone gets attacked at the end. It's like you feel like you're there. Those strikes, the sound that they make, the visuals of lighting up the theater every time a strike happens. Like it's you feel like you're in it. You don't just feel like the sound's coming from your TV.
It was, and it's almost weird that even though we've seen these movies countless times, seeing it in the theater truly makes you feel like you hadn't seen it before. It's weird.
It is. And one thing that's kind of making me realize this is I think it's special effects too for those kind of movies, because so much of it was done like practically or in like practical magic, so to say.
Yeah.
Using like techniques that would be kind of like too extreme to even bother with today. It's or unnecessary with, because there's so many other easier means. But something like in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the guy's face melts at the end.
Yeah.
Like that holds up so well, even on a giant screen. Because a lot of the times you'd think maybe that's not going to hold up when you see it on a big screen, because you can see all the little bells and whistles that make it work, and it doesn't make it work as well. But it's quite the opposite. You see something like that on screen and you're like, how in the heck did they do that?
You know what else I was just thinking too? When you're watching a movie at home, you have any number of distractions where, you know, you're eating, you're whatever, your kids, any number of things. When you go to a theater to see a movie, you're there to sit there and watch the movie.
Yeah.
And you don't get that watching a movie at home.
So I'm a little crazy. When I go to a movie, I don't just turn off my phone. Or I don't just put it on silent. I put it on do not disturb, put it on silent. I turn the volume all the way down. I turn the brightness all the way down.
Airplane mode.
Airplane mode. Don't forget, I turn on airplane mode after all of that. Unnecessary, I know. But then on top of all that, I turn it off.
Off goes the phone.
Completely off. Not just hit the button and the screen goes to sleep. I hold it down till it says swipe to power off. Because I don't want anything distracting me. If I'm going to watch this movie in a theater, I'm going to watch it without a single distraction, even the possibility of a distraction, at least from myself. But
he takes several precautions. He'll sit there for 5 minutes doing the 7 things he does to make sure the phone doesn't make a
double
sound.
checking them, making sure. Okay, it's do not disturb is on. Good.
You know, I don't go to that length, but I do get what you mean, because there's times where you can put your phone on silent or turn the screen off or what have you, that for whatever reason it still happens to make a sound.
And I don't think I've ever experienced something like that happening, but it's the idea of the possibility.
God forbid you're sitting there in a theater, and we've always talked about where, you know, there's a way to behave in a movie that I think is lost in today's society a little bit. And
a little bit.
There's people that, you know, you hear phones ring, what have you, and I never want to be that person. I never want to be the person that I'm sitting there and my phone rings and everyone looks down at me and you're like frantically trying to.
But there's even people that, like, I think the movie was Venom, the first Venom movie.
Yeah.
As exciting as that was to see, there was a guy sitting next to me. It was either Venom or Joker. It was one of those two movies. It was one of those like superhero movies. But there's a guy sitting next to me, and his phone starts ringing in the first like 30 seconds of the movie. And I'm thinking, oh great, at least it happened now. He'll turn it off. But nope. Instead of putting it on silent and putting it away, he answers it. He's like, dude, I'm in the movie. I think it was Joker, because I remember him saying like, I'm in Joker, man. And I'm like sitting there like, is this really happening? Like, it's one thing for someone to be like, I'm in the movie, I gotta go, bye. But this guy was like, talk to me. What do you want to know? I'm seeing Joker. I can tell you what's happening. I was like,
and not that it makes it any better, but the fact that this was the guy sitting right next to you.
Oh,
not like in the back corner of the theater.
There's always the person in front of you too.
With
with the
brightness,
all
brightness
all
the
white.
way
They
up.
don't have dark mode on. No, it's all like bright white screens, and they're just like, and they're not just like holding it like this. They're
No.
like, Can I see the text? Can you see the text behind me? You can see it? Good. like, come on. Phones are a no-go. I get it if you have like, I don't love this, but I get it if you have like the watch or something and the alert goes off. You can check it and then put your wrist away. But it's like, you don't need to be checking your texts. Look, if you got emergency, fine, but be discreet. Be discreet.
It's a 2 hour
check
movie.
it like this.
Be discreet. Be polite about it. It's not.
You don't have to check like,
The whole theater doesn't need to see what you're doing on your phone. If you have to check something in the theater, be respectful to the people around you.
I'm sure some of you will feel very seen right now, but we're not hating. Just advice. Next time you go to a movie theater, be a little more discreet. So we've talked about seeing old movies, and kind of the theater experience, but there are some great things in TV, and not just regular TV, but one of the things I love is animation. And with some of these franchises, like we've talked a lot about Jurassic Park, and we love Star Wars a lot. And if you know Star Wars, you know there's a lot of animation out there. But one of the things I feel like not a lot of people knew about was this show called Camp Cretaceous, that was kind of side by side with Jurassic World through, I think it only went through Fallen
Kingdom, the second one.
But it's like there are some great animated things out there that I feel like not a lot of people know about.
No, and we've had this discussion too, because I feel like there's a certain depth that I don't think some people think animation has, that I think people see something's animated. And this isn't everyone. There's a lot of people that enjoy animation. But I think there's certain people that will see something's animated and think it's for kids. It's for a younger audience.
Yeah.
It's PG. It's more geared toward younger people. And that more often than not is not the case. And I think people go into, the thought process on animation is just that it's geared toward a younger audience. And more often than not, that's just not the case.
Yeah, and Camp Cretaceous was one of those things where, kind of back to when we saw Jurassic Park in theaters, thinking this isn't really a kids thing. Why are there so many kids here? I thought this was like a horror movie. It was kind of shocking at first to hear that there was going to be an animated show for like
For
Jurassic Park,
Jurassic Park,
and I
right.
was like, really, the kids show? Like, isn't that kind of violent? With
Coming off of like the violence with the dinosaurs in all these movies that we've seen,
yeah,
again, an animated show.
and then sure enough, I started watching it, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? This is amazing. This is like one of the greatest things to come out of the Jurassic franchise.
Oh, it
and
really is.
And I'm like texting him for like months, like, dude, you gotta watch this. You gotta watch this.
For the longest time, I didn't get around to it. Not because I wasn't interested. I hadn't got around
Well,
to
that
it.
remains to be claimed, but I think he took some persuasion, but eventually when he watched it.
But yeah, once I watched it, I couldn't stop watching it.
Yeah, it's amazing how well that show, aimed for a younger audience, is able to still capture that kind of, not fear, but that tension of being trapped with dinosaurs in a way that's suitable for all ages.
Yep.
Because it's so well done. The storytelling in that show is so well done, and it's so cool to see things from another's perspective. Like I said, it was from Jurassic World's time period. So the show basically takes place the same time that movie takes place, and then it continues from that movie's events all the way to the start of Fallen Kingdom. And it's not like here's everything that happened in the movie just from a different angle. It's like here's everything from this movie but from a different experience.
It is. It's really cool how they did the show, where you have the timeline of what goes on in Jurassic World,
Mm-hmm.
and they have this show, Camp Cretaceous, where the experience that's going on during the timeline of that movie, but from a different group of people, a different experience, and it's really, really cool to see.
Like where things connect.
It's really, really cool to see. You'll see in the show, you see where things that happen in the show kind of what's happening in the movie at the time.
Yeah.
And vice versa. What's happening in the movie versus what's happening to the group of kids from the show.
And it's something that you don't think about. You think when you're seeing the movies, you're thinking, okay, these are all the events that are happening.
Yeah.
And you don't realize there's other things happening. It's not just this one event that's happening. This is park wide. Everything is going chaotic everywhere.
It's funny. It's something you really don't think about, I feel like, because you're focused on the characters. You're focused on the characters you're watching. Where in the movie, where you see, when Claire and Owen are looking for Claire's nephews, mm-hmm. or in the control room with Hoskins in his plan to use the Velociraptors to hunt the Indominus Rex. You're focused on that, mm-hmm. and meanwhile, you have no idea that there's this. Again, you don't think about it because your vision's kind of linear to the movie, but but there's you then you watch the show and you're thinking, there's, as you said, the chaos is happening all over the island.
Like, it's like how many of these stories are happening for different people.
Right.
You get now, because you have the movie and you have the show, you realize there are different perspectives, and it's so cool to see that. And I love when franchises can do that and expand the storytelling, not just with a single set of characters, but with a plethora of them.
Yeah.
And just show you everything.
There's some of my that concept, that idea is one of my favorite things ideas in media and cinema and television. Another example of it is Clone Wars, how it runs.
That was another one that took a long time to convince him to start.
He never lets me live it.
I never will. Anytime it's taken forever to make someone watch something and then they end up loving it, I'm never going to let them live it down.
Yeah.
You could have been indulging in this for so much longer.
I'll wear it. But no, it's again, with just that concept of Clone Wars with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and then you have Camp Cretaceous with Jurassic World and Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Mm-hmm. It just adds an entire new just feeling about the story. It really does.
Well, something like Clone Wars, for instance, I think there's a group of people out there that I think swear that that's the story that saved Anakin. Because there's some people out there that always saw the original 3 prequel movies and just thought like, this character isn't well written, all that.
Right.
He's kind of like back and forth. But it was the Clone Wars that like fleshed out his character and really gave him space to be who he is.
We've had this conversation several times where you could make a case that from episode 1, 2, and 3 that his fall from, you know, the force sensitive boy on Tatooine to Darth Vader at the end of Revenge of the Sith is very, it feels quick.
From the movies you're saying?
Yes, just from the movies.
Just from the movies.
It feels quick. It feels like he kind of makes leaps from like I said, from the young boy on Tatooine to like Darth Vader.
He's this bright-eyed kid to all of a sudden being like, I'm gonna massacre all these like younglings. People.
Yeah, yeah. And Clone Wars gives you the extended, deeper dive into his life from when he's
it just shows you like he didn't just flip a switch.
Right.
He had things he cared about, and things in the war were kind of going in ways he didn't expect them to, which made him distrust the people he thought he was able to trust.
He doesn't just one day start distrusting the Jedi Order and the people around him.
But with the show, you finally get to see that like slowly be revealed in a way that is much easier to take in.
It's once you see it, I remember I even had thoughts when I was first seeing the Attack of the Clones and into Revenge of the Sith that it almost feels like his reasoning is not the right word. The fall is
like there's no motivation. It
almost feels slightly silly. And then
I can understand that.
It almost and then you see the show and you see this progression of things that continue to happen and his trust is shaken more and more and more to then when you get to the events of Revenge of the Sith, it makes
it feels fleshed out.
Yeah, I don't want to say it didn't make sense because it does. It just feels rushed and quick. And
I think a lot of that just goes into the idea of what Star Wars is. There's so much to tell, but with only 3 movies to keep the like the parallel between the original and the prequels like the same. There's only so much time, and so there is a lot of stuff that you have to kind of rush through a little bit.
I will say, Darth Vader's story, Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader's story, is so much better with the events of the Clone Wars. I really think it is.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's not even just Anakin. Anakin is like way more fleshed out because of that show, but it's other characters.
No, it is.
It makes you. I think the thing with Star Wars was that when it was just the movies, it was a lot of cool ideas. But what the Clone Wars does is it makes those ideas kind of like a reality. It's like now there's all these planets that we like saw glimpses of before, but didn't really get to explore. And now we get to like see them, explore them, and like flesh out this galaxy. So it's real. It's not just a story.
And you also, from movie to movie, often have gaps of time, long gaps of time.
Yeah.
The show is more of a consistent timeline where things happen closer together, not where, you know, how in A Phantom Menace, he's a child. And then in Attack of the Clones,
that would have been interesting to see a series between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. Yeah, because there's a lot of time there.
Yeah, but no, it is. It's there's a lot of time between when he's the boy in the first movie to when he's, I don't know how old he is, but he's a young Padawan learner in the second one, an arrogant Padawan learner, if you will, in the second one, and then even in the third one, he's obviously a established Jedi. But again, there's a gap of time from the first to the second, to the second to the third. And the Clone Wars provides you it's filler's not the right word. It provides you substance in between those gaps of time that fill in rather than just those gaps of time and of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny thinking about all this. Like when I was younger and I was like first getting into Star Wars and all that, it started obviously with like the originals. I think it was my grandpa who had the movies on VHS, and I would always take them and watch them. But my little kid brain, I didn't make the connection that Anakin was Darth Vader. They say it in the movies, so like but my little kid brain didn't make that connection immediately.
No.
So when I saw the prequels as they were coming out, all I thought was, Anakin is so cool. And I always loved Darth Vader. I thought Darth Vader was cool. And I always loved Anakin. But then when I saw episode 3 and Anakin became Vader, I just remember thinking like, oh my God, both of my favorite things ever have just become one. This is like the greatest thing ever. And it was like, my mind was blown. I was so excited. Like it made me love the character even more. Of Anakin, love him even more, just knowing that he was connected to this other thing that I loved.
Right.
I don't know if there's any logic behind that, but yeah, I don't know if I was always team dark side, but I was team bad guy.
I feel you there. I do.
But speaking of like those like long gaps of time, like we were talking about with film with the TV shows, another great show was Rebels.
Oh.
And I felt like there was not really much that happened in between the Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. And I loved that Rebels.
There wasn't much content that filled in that period of time.
I think there were in books at the time
Right.
and comics, but not much in like mainstream media.
Yeah.
And Rebels was just, after Clone Wars had been like semi-canceled at the time, Rebels was like a godsend. It was my favorite thing ever in Star Wars, and it was just another way, like Camp Cretaceous, to show things happening in a universe where it wasn't this same set of characters. It was all new characters, but living in the same world in the same time, dealing with their own problems.
Yeah.
And
that was the coolest part about Rebels for me, was they were a group of characters that none of us had ever heard of.
It was so
new characters,
well thought out and planned, that it works so well.
It does.
There's an arc, there's character development, all the characters feel so real, and I love them all to death.
You grow very, very attached to the characters in that show.
It's
Even more
Star Wars storytelling at its finest.
Even more so than some of certain characters in the movies, because
for sure,
because they're you can only dig so much and provide so much substance of a specific character,
and over
in a
4
movie.
seasons you've got like all the time you need, so you
Right.
can take your time with these characters and let them grow naturally rather than just a quick flip. And
it's also
different.
centered around a smaller group. This isn't like 15.
Well, I always
people.
kind of liked the comparison that it was sort of like the alternative to Luke, Leia, and Han.
Yeah.
And Chewie. Don't ever leave out Chewie. He didn't get his medal. So you can't forget Chewie.
No. Chewie got shafted.
But it felt like if this was that group, but in a whole new way. And I kind of, some of the stuff I remember when the show was first coming out is a lot of it was visually based off of original concept art for those original movies. The character of Zeb was the original design, I think, for Chewbacca. And it just works so well because they're not just creating something for the sake of creating something.
No.
They're creating it with a purpose and with like a plan to make it feel like it was always rooted in this world.
And again, it's like you said, with the comparison with Camp Cretaceous, where you're so focused on Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, Anakin, Luke, Leia, Han, you don't think about the other characters all spread out the galaxy, or the other people, I should say, that are going
Or
through,
aliens.
yeah, anyone that are just not the main characters that you just don't think about, because in the movies you're focused on the main characters.
Yeah.
So then you have this show, this Rebels show, where you have this group of characters that until the show came out are obviously non-existent, more or less, because they're not explored anywhere else. And by the end of the show, actually within an episode of the show, you find yourself dying to know what happens to them as, you know, they go through their adventures and problems.
I think a big part of that is when you come off of a show like Clone Wars, where there's all this action all the time. There's Jedis flinging lightsabers around and like all these alien creatures and exciting things going on, different places to visit, where you're going from that to Rebels, which kind of treats everything like magic. It's not all in your face. It takes like a full episode before you actually see a lightsaber. And when you see it, it's not just vroom, vroom, here's a lightsaber. It's how can we make this moment feel like a defining moment?
Yeah.
And everything in the show feels like that. It's not just that. It's every little beat that every character experiences feels like a defining moment. And it makes these stories truly masterful. Like it's the best kind of storytelling.
You know what's one of my favorite parts about Rebels is I find that you could get someone to watch that show and have seen nothing else Star Wars, and it can be enjoyable.
Yeah.
There's things in the show that go back to the movies.
Yeah, like you get like the occasional reference of a character popping up.
But you really can watch that show having seen nothing Star Wars related and enjoy the show for what it is.
Exactly. Yeah, it's if you're trying to get someone into Star Wars, of course, the obvious approach would be to watch all the movies, because it's probably the shortest approach if you're not going to sit through 7 seasons of Clone Wars and 4 or 5 seasons of Rebels.
Yeah.
But like Rebels really is a great way to just get someone into like the mythology of Jedi and the Force and just the beauty of a universe that's not ours.
Yeah.
Because it really just takes all the things that like the movies and Clone Wars like made you excited about and showed big on the screen, and it takes them and makes them, it doesn't make them smaller, but it takes the small things and make them feel important.
Yeah.
And it's so unique in Star Wars.
I agree.
And speaking of like things that you could start watching without having seen others, it makes me wonder, do we need everything to be canon?
No, I don't think you do. I really don't. I
mean, I think it would be cool to have things that aren't canon. I understand the love for the canon.
Yeah, and
I love the canon.
It makes sense. It's not like it's the logic is, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
You get it. You know, when there's a universe that's created, it makes sense to have characters and situations and things follow said universe in the canon. But there's room
for other stories that don't have to connect.
I think that's the thing. It feels like stuff gets left out that doesn't necessarily have to be, because people feel like everything has to be centered around the canon.
Yeah.
And stuff gets left out. Stuff that I think us and other people would like to see.
Yeah, and there's stuff that like when it comes to a universe building kind of story like Star Wars, is it too much for everything to be canon for a new person to get into?
Yeah.
Because I think there's 2 sides to it. One, it could be very exciting because there's so much you have now at your fingertips.
You're kind of looking at it from 2 perspectives. You're looking at it from people who have seen almost or everything. Those are the people that all of the canon, they really look for, you know, with the canon. But then, as you said, with people that maybe haven't been too as into Star Wars as others, if everything's centered around the canon, a lot of it can be confusing. People can be lost. People might not get into it the same way the people that have seen everything do, because they know everything.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a little bit of that happening right now with Marvel. Now that Marvel's kind of gone through their Infinity Saga that was like their main thing.
Right.
What is that, 21 something movies? And so now people kind of just getting into it are like, well, do I really want to watch 21 movies? Well, now it's probably like closer to 30 with however many TV shows now.
Yep.
It's so much information to watch. And sure, you can pick and choose the things you want, but with a story that is so specifically intended to connect, because that's the thing with Star Wars is you have the prequels, which are one story that flow into the originals,
right?
But each of them can stand on their own. You don't need each other to watch. You can just like one and stick with that, or watch both. But with Marvel, it's written very differently. It's written with a single goal in mind.
Yeah.
And so everything that comes before this goal it's so specifically aimed towards it.
Yeah. They're all steps along the way.
It's hard to watch one thing without feeling like you're missing out if you don't watch another thing.
And it's like every show, every movie has one, as you said, some you're working toward that goal, and two, they all have connections to other movies, other
and I think
shows.
That's fun. I think it's great when they do that. I love Marvel and I love watching all their stuff, but I get it. Like when I hear someone who's like, I've never seen it and I don't really want to get into it, and it's hard to explain like where to start, because
you can't start in the middle because you inevitably leave a ton out.
So here's another thing then. Are you the type of person that likes watching things in the order of release or the order of like chronological order?
No, the in order of in 100% in order of chronological, because
not release.
Well, obviously it makes it a lot harder because stuff gets released in like, just for example, in regards to Star Wars, obviously episode 4, 5, 6, then 1, 2, 3. So now when I watch Star Wars movies, I'll watch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because that's the order the story goes in.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
I'm the opposite. I watch everything in release order.
Really?
Yeah. Because it's like Marvel was a good one to kind of compare to that. But even Star Wars, it's like knowing the things you know from the originals, I think are important when you see the prequels because there's so many nods to them.
Yeah.
If you watch the prequels first, those nods don't make sense.
It's true. That is true.
And there was something with I think it was Captain Marvel. There was something in that movie. God, I can't remember now. It was something with Nick Fury. Maybe it was his eye patch thing. I remember like seeing the movie and the whole eye patch thing kind of just felt like a quick gag.
Yeah.
Because it was taking place before the events of like all of the Marvel MCU.
Yeah.
But it was like, now when you watch it, if you watch it in chronological order, it's like all the things from that movie that reference other movies, you're getting too early.
I will say
you're getting like references to Captain America and Iron Man and stuff before they've even appeared.
I will say, I think I look at Marvel and Star Wars different in that way. I think
so. Would you watch Marvel in release order and Star Wars in chronological?
I think I would. It's funny because my sister has seen very few of the Marvel movies.
Yeah.
And she's a couple times mentioned she wants to because she's interested in seeing some of the new ones that are coming out. And like how we were saying,
go catch up on 20 years of
she's told me like she wants to watch all the movies with me. And I'm like, I mean, it sounds great, but that's going to take us years.
I remember I was lucky that I got my sister into it on the first Avengers because that movie came out and I was just so blown away. I was like, this movie is so good. You have to see this.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, do I have to watch all the others? I'm like, don't worry. There's only like 4.
Right. Now,
it's like,
with my sister,
don't worry. There's 27.
It's I mean,
plus 3 TV shows, spin-off.
I think it's 4 TV shows, but
it's a lot of TV shows.
Yeah, it's
I've watched all but one. Um,
Of the shows.
yeah, and it's one of the more recent ones. But it's it's hard to say what's necessary
Yeah.
if you're telling someone who wants to know what to watch,
Right.
because a lot of it is just taste. If you like certain characters, if you like certain types of stories, because then you get the Captain America movies that are like complete, like it's a whole new thing from what Iron Man was. Iron Man
Right.
was like the cool macho hero kind of guy who's kind of arrogant, and
You're right.
then you go to this humble guy who his stories are much more political thrillers rather
Yeah.
than like superhero movies.
Right.
And then you get like space movies with Guardians, and it's closer to Star Wars than it is anything in Marvel.
Yeah.
And we both love Guardians to death. It's probably our favorite thing in
What?
Marvel.
How many times did we see Guardians in the theaters? 3 times? 4?
The third one?
Yeah, the third one.
I think you saw it a little less than me. I saw it, I think 5, 6.
I believe we saw it 3 times.
All
together
in IMAX, by the way.
in the span of 10 days.
Oh, probably.
12
It was probably
days?
less.
It.
That tearjerker.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, like it's hard to say what's necessary, because so much of it feels necessary, but I don't know. It's one of those opinion things, I guess.
Yeah. And it's a taste thing too, because again, how you were saying, like with specific characters, if you, for example, don't really care one way or another about Hawkeye, you probably wouldn't have sat down to watch the Hawkeye show.
Yeah.
But
then there's things in the Hawkeye show that lead into this show and that show. It's like, and I don't remember specifically if there were things in that show, but
there's
definitely things that. One of the things that I don't love when it comes to TV, and this isn't necessarily a Marvel problem, it's almost more of a DC problem. I don't know if you've followed a lot of their like CW shows and stuff, but I remember when they first started coming out with those shows, I loved them, and I was like, these are great. And then they came out with a second one, and it was like, oh, this is kind of cool. They kind of connect, and then they really do connect, and they have the characters crossover.
Right.
And then they add 2 more shows, and another show, and another show, and they all start crossing over. But then you lose interest in certain shows, or you're not keeping up with them all the same. And now there's a crossover where you get part 1 in one show, part 2 in another show, part 3 in another show. And it's like, well, now I have to catch up on all these other shows. You could watch them, but I'd like to know everything in it. I'm the type of person who likes to know everything there is when there is content to know when I'm watching something.
Yeah.
But Marvel hasn't done that so much. What they have kind of fallen into is introducing characters in other properties. So it's like what the CW did was they introduced the Flash in the Arrow show.
Right.
And it kind of made it, they when they did the Flash, they kind of gave him a proper intro in his own show. But it did kind of feel like you're introducing a character outside of his own show, which doesn't really make sense. And Marvel's kind of fallen victim of that just by circumstance, because so many of their characters cross over. And so now they're bringing these new characters who start in other projects. And now when they get their own projects, the question is, do you need to go back and watch all these other things that they're in? And probably.
Yeah.
But it's a long list of things to watch. But I think for the most part, they're all enjoyable. Yeah. There's some things that aren't as great as the others, but I think for the most part, they're movies. We're here to have fun, and they're fun.
Yeah. And it's when it's a franchise that you love, no one's gonna love everything. You don't love everything Marvel. You don't love everything Star Wars, nor do I. Pirates of the Caribbean, Jurassic Park.
Star Wars is a little hard. I feel like I do love everything.
Yeah. It's very, very
Star Wars is pretty great.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some things, but
the sequel trilogy we'll get into eventually. But it's there's a lot.
A lot of opinions.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things with Star Wars is that there was an old canon.
Right.
And now there's this new canon. And I remember that transition was not as fun as I would have wanted. But they have really done some cool things. I don't remember what the original way was, but I think I think it was in the new canon that a Sith had to make, they had to like find a new crystal for their lightsaber and make it bleed to turn it red.
Right.
Which I thought was cool. Like that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
It's not just like flip a switch and now instead of blue I got red. It was like a cool idea. It had to be like this painful process.
Yeah.
And so there were some cool things that they added. And the more that like I came to know, I think the more I liked. And there were things that I missed from the old canon, things from like books or comics. But God, Dave Filoni, if you know who Dave Filoni is, you're a Star Wars fan. He's been bringing everything that I love into the canon, and he knows how to tell stories so well. Like whether it was stuff from Clone Wars that he kind of brought back when he did season 7, because Clone Wars was canceled before the new canon.
Yeah, it was.
And like basically when they brought it back, he had already done Rebels at this point. And so now there was like all this stuff with certain characters that we now know. So how do you incorporate that? And with Rebels, he had already started dipping into the legacy canon, which was the old canon.
Right.
And bringing in characters like Thrawn and stuff. And like, that's cool.
It is.
That's awesome when you get to see things cross over. But it's not all bad to have to start fresh because it gives you a new area to grow.
I agree.
New characters can appear, new things. We were talking earlier today about Starkiller from The Force Unleashed, and we love him so much.
If you've never played those games, the Force Unleashed and the Force Unleashed and the Force I can't talk. The Force Unleashed
and the Force Unleashed 2. I was watching a behind the scenes thing on them making it recently, and like the idea was just to make a game where you felt badass with the Force, and they accomplished it.
They did accomplish that.
The
games are so much fun to play.
Oh yeah, and one thing we were talking about is that we're sad that that's kind of not in the canon anymore. And with all the stuff that they've laid out for the new canon, I'm sad, but I like a lot of the things that they've done. So I'm kind of happy that it still exists. It's not like when the new canon started, they deleted everything and like erased it from all your hard drives and like threw out your Xbox. Like you still have all your books, your games, all that stuff. You can still indulge in it whenever you want, and new people can still find it.
Right.
It's not gone. But we were kind of sad that there are characters and stuff that aren't in the new canon, and we were curious if like we're gonna see any other characters that Dave is gonna bring in, because Dave's kind of like the guy who knows how to do it.
And we were talking about how cool it would be to see Starkiller make the jump from from the games into a show or
especially
the movies.
Because they used Sam Witwer's face,
right?
Like
we also
he can play it and it works,
right? We also understand that like where the universe obviously went, it would be very hard to have
that makes sense
character
with this canon,
in Darth Vader having a secret apprentice with everything else that has gone on.
He's already got an apprentice that he failed.
Yeah. But that goes back to our conversation where not everything has to be canon. In theory. But
because it's fun. It's fun to have things that you can just enjoy without the thought of
it has to be canon.
Am I going to need to watch all this other stuff to understand?
It has to follow this. It has to go back to that.
Yeah.
It has to connect to this. It has to connect to that.
Yeah.
I think in a way, it kind of closes you off from opportunities because everything has to connect to the canon.
Well, they did their small series on Disney. What was it called? Visions.
Yes.
I never got too into it. I've watched the whole first season and like some of the other stuff, but I think it's great to have stuff that's not canon. I think there's a place for it. People like it, and it's a great. The fact that it's animation, it's cool because animation can do so much that live action.
It does. Can't. Animation provides you an aspect that live action just can't.
Because you're not going across that kind of what do they call it? The uncanny valley, where something feels kind of real but not real enough.
Right.
Where animation, you just kind of you're already past that because you don't think that way in
Yeah,
animation.
you don't have to. We've had this conversation a lot where sometimes things that are transferred from animation to live action, one of the things you have to kind of, or at least we think about, is how something translates or transfers.
Yeah.
When something's animation, you don't have to think about that.
Yeah, you're not thinking about, oh, how'd they pull off that stunt?
Right. How they move this character from animation to live action.
I mean, when you start thinking like, how did they move this character? Art is hard. By no means is it easier, but there's a sense of just immediately clicking into the idea that you believe this.
Yeah.
And like, even with the canon stuff, I don't know all the canon for this, but I got you into Arcane, the League of Legends show. I don't know anything about League of Legends or anything, but one day I just thought, this show looks awesome. And so I played it and fell in love with it immediately. And from what I understand, it's taking from the canon of the characters in the game and all that lore and using it sort of as a starting point. It's not locking itself into anything that the game has already created.
No.
So it frees itself up to tell whatever stories it wants in the best way possible, not having to force themselves into a canon that already exists.
It was funny when he first told me to watch that show, he had always just called it Arcane. And then
I didn't want to be like, go watch League of Legends.
Because my first thought would have been, I've never played this game before. I know nothing about it. I'm not going to give a damn about the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really
that show it's
phenomenal.
It's art on another level.
It's phenomenal.
It's
beautiful.
I cry thinking about it sometimes.
The show is
the story
phenomenal.
is just so emotional. It's animation, but it's made for, like, I wouldn't say it's made for adults, but it's definitely like geared toward an older audience.
And how about the art style? The art style of the animation.
It is so unique. It's like taking all these different ideas from all these other different art backgrounds and finding a way to merge them into something that's not just a gimmick. It's used, the way they use the art is done in a way that benefits the story or the characters. It's not just, what's a cool art style?
Right.
I mean, there's some of that, sure, I bet, but it's, how does this art style translate to this character or this emotion or this moment?
It really is. It's one of those things where, you know how you can see a movie and you'll be like, I've seen this art style before in a different movie or a show. There's nothing, at least to my knowledge, that I can compare the art style of Arcane to.
Yeah, I mean, the closest thing I would compare it to, and it's not even a comparison of visualness, it's more a comparison of trying to do something new. And that would be something like Spider-Verse. Because it's like Spider-Verse was a completely new art style and animation that people hadn't seen before. And that's what I felt like Arcane was. It was just a completely new utilization of art.
Yeah. For sure.
It
in the same, that was a good example, because I remember when the first Spider-Verse came out, the animation blew people away, me included. And I'm sure you included as well.
Oh yeah.
And it's unbelievable.
Because they didn't even just focus on the art. It was like the timing of like how frames move, rather than doing like 24 frames a second. They'd change it because they wanted it to look more comic book like.
It was just so unique. And it's obviously not the same art style, but just the uniqueness of
and
the
Arcane kind of does
Arcane.
that. It takes like those techniques and it all gears it towards the story. And it's storytelling at its finest. It's, if you like animation, or maybe if you don't like animation and you just need something to show you that you're missing out on animation, watch Arcane.
You will get hooked into that show.
It's beautiful. It's like I said, I'll watch like a YouTube video of just like character moments and I'll just start crying. It's so, the show hits so hard on every level.
It does. There's not many shows, and when I say not many, I'd say less than a handful, that I could like watch the show and immediately start it again. Arcane is one of them.
Yeah, I did that.
Literally. Like, you could watch the show, watch the last episode, and be like, all right, I'm going to start it over.
Yeah.
And normally, you know, the shows that you like would do that for are more like kind of sitcom type shows where
It's like
a,
that feeling, like the sitcom stuff is more, I think that's more of the feeling of, I don't know, with me, it's always been like, I feel like I'm part of this friend group or something. Like with a show like
right.
Friends, it's
Yes.
like, I feel like I'm one of them now. And so
Right.
rewatching it is like just hanging out with your friends again.
Right.
Arcane is kind of like that, but in a way that's more like, I just experienced something beautiful and traumatic and amazing.
Yeah.
But life can't compare, so I gotta watch it again.
From the style of the animation to the score to the songs that are used to the
Yeah, that's a beautiful show, man.
the characters,
And it goes to the show that, if I'm correct, and they aren't like sticking strictly to the canon of the games, that you can have things that aren't always one singular canon.
yeah.
Like, it's good sometimes to branch out and have things that are free to tell their own stories in their own way. Because being stuck to a canon can be great for lore and for the people who love learning
Sure.
new things.
Yeah.
But it can also put you in a box. And I think sometimes
There's room for both. There's room
both.
for canon and there's room for non-canon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a good chat.
I'd say so.
A lot of topics covered. We got some Star Wars, some old movies, Jurassic Park, Arcane. But we're going to call it a night. So thank you for tuning in with us.
Yeah.
I'm Brandon.
My name's Matt.
And you're watching For All Fankind. Thank you for tuning in.
See you next time.